UFC 276 is coming up quick, and it's a pretty fun card, I will say. I think there's a lot of good fights, a lot of fights that can go meh, and some decent challenges for people coming up. Let's get right into it. Starting off with the ever-pleasant early prelims, we have the 11-7-0-1 Jessica Rose, Jess Clark losing the ring name battle against 9-6-2 Julia Stoliarenko, with Julia being 5 years younger, 2 inches taller, and snagging 2 inches in reach. This is just a weird fight to look at. Clark has an interesting UFC background, 4 wins, 3 losses, decent spread of stats. By that I mean a 3.95 landed, 3.56 absorbed, backed up by 1.77 takedown average. She trends more towards grappling, it seems, with at least 1 takedown in every one of her wins, and normally she secures more takedowns than her opponent, only exception being her first UFC fight and the match against Sarah Alpar. Julia has a different story, 0 wins in the UFC, all of them being fairly one-sided against her, 2.68 landed, a 4.2 absorbed, and a 0.25 takedown average. Vegas likes Clark here, and quite frankly, I'm going to agree. She's shown the ability to win in sure fashion, and despite being streaky, I like her success versus Julia's potential here. 15-10-0-1, Jessica Evil Eye looks to rebound against the 10-2 Macy, the future Barber, with Barber being 11 years younger and giving up an inch in reach and height. Now, Eye is another interesting case to look at, since she seems to alternate between being incredibly close and getting blown out in her fights. She'll get outstruck 148-77 with 5 minutes of control, to losing narrowly against Jennifer Maia. Yes, it was unanimous, but still a close fight, closer than this at least. Her stats also reflect this, with a 3.96 landed, 4.19 absorbed, and a takedown average of 0.55. But Barber, on the other hand, is surging and always kind of keeps it close in the losses, but runs away with her wins. She's got heavy hands with 5 KO career wins and a pretty good striking percentage, a 4.45 landed, a 2.69 absorbed. This is all backed up with a 1.30 takedown percentage, where she can put her opponent on the ground and just control them or ground and pound them into oblivion. Favorite here is Barber, and to be boring, I agree. I could win, but Barber's been hot lately. I like her striking percentage a little better than Eye's, and I like the power she has when it comes to the ground. Ending off her early prelims, finally. 17-10, Uriah Primetime Hall looks to rebound quick against 22-4 Andre Sergipiano Munoz. Muniz is 5 years younger, 2 inches taller, losing an inch in reach though. To say it simply, Hall's a striker with the power to back it up. He's got 13 career KO wins and shown with his classic striking percentage of 3.47 to 4.07. He's also proven that he's got a gas tank by getting KOs in the later rounds, but there always is the issue with his style. That's getting KO'd yourself and having to consistently fight from behind. Muniz is the complete opposite, with a striking of 2.18 to 1.82, but a takedown percentage of 3.60 and 15 career submission wins. It is worth noting that his submission wins come in the first, with anything going longer ending with either ending unanimous decision wins. Vegas likes Muniz, and I'm going to agree again. Hall doesn't have the greatest takedown defense, and Muniz is dangerous in the first, where he gets most of his submission wins. I wouldn't count out Hall, since he tends to fight well down, but I think the danger comes from how long this fight goes and how much ground control Muniz can build up and avoid that shot. But finally to the prelims, moving quick. 19-6, Brad Tavares looks to keep winning against the 16-2 Dricus still knocks Duplessis. Duplessis is 6 years younger and stealing 2 inches in reach. Tavares is a bit rounded in the sense of doing what he needs to win. He does tend to lean on the striking a little more, 3.18 to 2.76, but it's that grinding style of striking where you just hit a lot but don't really seem to deal like dangerous damage. 12 decision wins, 5 KO wins, paint that picture pretty vividly. Takedown game is existent, feels almost entirely situational or game plan based. Does technically have the ability to get submission wins, but he only has 2 and none in the UFC. Duplessis here is the UFC newcomer, so these stats are horribly skewed, but he seems to be a heavy finisher in any sort of way. Both his UFC wins are by knockouts and currently has a takedown average of 2.99. On that side, he does additionally have 9 submission wins outside the UFC, so the ground here seems like a major threat, as well as his ability to swing on the feet. Vegas likes Duplessis by a narrow margin, and I will follow that. Tavares can win, but it's a grinder versus a finisher, and I feel like in this case, I'm going to go with the finisher here. But we're moving on to the funeral pyre of Cowboy and a battle between 2 old men. 34-16-0-1, Jim A10 Miller tries to keep winning against the 36-16-0-2 Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Miller giving up 5 inches in height and 2 in reach. Miller is a finisher on the ground and kind of on the feet, sums it up well, honestly. He's a 2.78 to 2.92 in striking and a 1.61 takedown average, where he does most of his work. I mean, 18 submission wins, a majority of them do come quick, though, first round, but he has shown some ability to go the distance and still finish. But Cowboy is not what he was. His age is showing, and he really has fallen off the wagon. Normally, his strength is striking and endurance, being able to string together combos and be dangerous in that regard. Doesn't have that anymore, honestly, in his recent fights. Now, Vegas likes Miller, and I will definitely agree. Despite his age, he seems to be going a little steady against lower-end opponents in his last 2 fights. I don't think we can think of Cowboy in that same lens of where he is anymore. 9-0, Ian Discount McGregor Gary tries to keep his 0 against 11-3 Gabriel Gifted Green. 5 years age, favoring Gary, so he's 4 inches in height. Gary is simply put a striker. He's a 4.60 to a 3.10. And though he did have some issues on his last fight with getting controlled against the cage and getting pushed back, Green has a bit more of a ground game and the ability to throw submissions. 6th outside the UFC, is striking in that classic grappler style, basically dead even, though he has shown a flash of KO power in his last fight. Now that was brief, because I really don't have much to say about these. Both these guys are relatively newcomers, and there's still room for them to grow. But in terms of Vegas odds, the favorite is Gary, and I'm going to disagree here. Not because I'm against the hype train, not because I don't think he can win, but if I'm trying to be realistic and pick a fighter here, I didn't like how he looked against Weeks. And I think Green here is more of a threat than Weeks was, and unless Gary fixed those holes in his game, I think Green might be able to exploit those more than Weeks did. But ending the prelims,
high stakes at 55.
10-2,
Here we go. This fight clock is brought to you by
looks to rebound against the 12-5 Jalen the Tarantula Turner, who wins the best nickname on the card. Turner takes 3 years of age, 7 inches in height, and 6 inches in reach. Now, Riddell is the ground-heavy fighter, an average of 1.87 takedowns across his UFC fight, and at least 1 in every UFC fight he's had. Striking is functional with a 4.76 landed to a 3.55 absorbed, and he hasn't shown much of that striking power, which leads into a bit of his style as a grinder in his fights. His cardio is certainly good, being able to go the distance, get the decision win, and look good in most of them. Turner, on the other hand, is a finisher, a majority of them being through strikes, and that's his major strength, a 6.51 to 4.34 landed. His takedowns are another tool, but unlike Riddell, they're more so when necessary. I don't really get the sense that they are a big part of his game, but they're kind of threats to make you think about more so. Now, the favorite here is Turner, and I'm going to agree. Riddell could win, and once again, it's a finisher versus a grinder matchup. Turner can throw a lot, and while Riddell likes the ground and likes the grinding, when you grind, you end up having to go the distance with fighters who like to finish, and I think that puts him in a bit disadvantage. But we're starting off the main card. 29-15-1, Robbie Rufus White. Let's get a straight going against 17-8, Brian Bam Bam Barberena. Barberena is 7 years younger, 2 inches taller, does lose 2 in reach though. Now the best thing I can say is that Lawler is Lawler. Means he's a pretty well-rounded skill set despite his current stats, and now recently he hasn't been as good, and he's been outstruck or outgrappled in most of his recent fights. Does still have a good deal of toughness since the majority of his recent losses have been in decision wins for his opponents. He does still have some power, but with his age, it has waned a bit. When it comes to Rayne, on the other hand, he's a frustrating fighter for me. He just seems to win. Like, not like the sense of like, ooh, I wanted you to lose, but the sense of like, how did you win that fight? You spent the entire fight pinned against the cage. What? But it works. His striking is okay, and so is his takedown game, a 5.61 to 4.83, and a 0.17 takedown percentage. This is a weird fight for me because Vegas likes Lawler, and normally I would pick Lawler. Because Barberena pisses me off regularly, I'm going to pick him purely out of spite. Next up, 19-7-0-1. Pedro, the young Punisher Munoz, looks to put a 0 in the 15-1 Sean undefeated O'Malley. O'Malley being 8 years younger, 5 inches taller, with 7 inches in reach. Munoz is a dog. None of his stats really jump out, but his toughness and tenaciousness keep him in these fights and constantly threaten the victory. Striking is a solid 5.50 to 6.09, and that shows that sort of constant pressure and threatening he does. Some semblance of a ground game, but I don't see it a lot. It's mainly a defensive game plan thing in my opinion. O'Malley's a little simpler to talk about. He's a striker, 8.26, 3.52 landed, and 3 takedowns in his second fight. He leverages his reach well and knows how to pour it on when needed. Vegas likes O'Malley, but I'm going to pick Munoz. It's not a lot of the stats here, but the rabid dog style of Munoz, and if his toughness holds up, he might be able to get O'Malley to make a mistake and take advantage of it. This is sort of the veteran versus the newer guy here. I can't really call O'Malley a new guy. 25-2, Sean Tarzan Strickland looks to keep winning against 5-1 Alex Poatan Pereira. Strickland being 3 years younger, but 3 inches shorter in both height and reach. Strickland is a pretty well-rounded fighter. He's a 5.53 to a 3.94 in his striking, and the ability to both rely on power and pour on quantity when needed. He can also throw takedowns when needed, or occasionally he can force them to happen. I will also say he's very adaptable to switching between the grinding and finishing style of fighting. And Pereira, with only 2 UFC fights, has proven to be a very skilled striker and pretty monstrous in power and technique. And yes, he had a career outside the UFC, but it wasn't MMA, and while some of the skill carries over, I don't want to comment too much on what it means before coming to MMA. Vegas has it even, which makes it my job hard, but I'm going to lean towards Strickland based on the switchable technique and the style that might give him an edge. It's a super close fight, honestly. Poaton's probably the better pick here, but something about Strickland's got me going, I think he might grind his way to a split decision win here. But now, the title fights. First of the 2 this night. We have the trilogy rematch of the 24-1 Alexander the Great Volkanovsky against the 23-6 Max Blessed Holloway. Now, Holloway is 3 years younger, 5 inches taller, but Volk does take 2 inches in reach somehow. But jumping into it, there's not a lot I can say about Volkanovsky here. He's a well-rounded fighter with the ability to do well on the feet with a 6.63 to 3.32 striking differential. That being said, he isn't so much a power puncher as he's a swarmer, that kind of grinding style of striking. Not so much grinding where he just hits and hits, but more so the fact that he hits, dodges, and just starts to racks up the points. He does have a handful of UFC KOs, but they're not exactly his game. He does also have the ability, which is Regal, since his importance is one of his major do-what-I-need-to-win tools. Doesn't need it to win some fights, but it's always this trick he has to turn to it when necessary. And Holloway is honestly a little less rounded, but he makes up for it with his insanely talented striking, a 7.38 to 4.89 for the differential. He backs up that with a monstrous motor and some great toughness and drive to get the fight to where he wants it, and he will finish the fight if he can. But unsurprisingly, Vegas likes the guy who's won 2 of his 3, 2 of the soon-to-be 3 rather, and I'm going to agree. This is not a slight against Max, and I can still see Holloway winning, but we've seen this fight happen twice, and we've seen what Volkanovsky has done both fights, and we've seen the game plan Volkanovsky has. He just wins. If you need to fight exciting, he does. If you need to fight boring, he does. If you need to, you outstrike your opponent, you outwrestle your opponent. He just wins is kind of what he does, and I have to respect it. But for the main event, or at least the co-main event, 22-1, the Israel, the last stylebender Adesanya, looks to continue his dominance against the 15-5 Jared Killer Gorilla Cannonier. Adesanya is 6 years younger, 4 inches taller, and does take 3 inches in reach. To put it plainly, Adesanya is a monster. Striking is great, and while he doesn't shoot takedowns at all, he's skilled at surging or even just defending them. Sorry, I say surging, I meant to say surviving. But as I mentioned, it's all striking for him. 3.84 to 2.56 seems low till you account for how his striking works. He leverages range and technique to pick hard shots to land. If he needs to pour it on, he does, but normally he just hits you hard when he needs to. He really works his range well. He does have the ability to put people to sleep, but he's also more than willing to dance and pick you apart. Cannonier, on the other hand, is a different story. Relies more on power to win his fights with a 3.76, 3.29 striking. It's not great, but the power serves that equalizer. He also can shoot takedowns, but they are a rarity, with only 1 coming in his last 7, so I'm not sure how prevalent it will be here. Vegas likes Adesanya heavily, and I'll agree. His reach and variety are a bit above Cannonier, and while he's definitely a threat, I think Adesanya has faced better power guys before and handled them okay. Looking at his fight against Jan Blachowicz, that's a power guy. That's a punching power dude, and it came down to a decision win because Adesanya had the good striking defense, survived on the ground. That being said, this is a fun card. It's got some really cool implications and some really interesting kind of prove-it fights for some guys. Looking forward to see what happens. See you next time.